As always, it's such a pleasure to welcome everybody here to our Siyum for Masechet Moed Katan. Great to see you, everybody, one month after another. It's nice to see familiar faces. It's nice to see new faces. Tonight's Siyum, or today's Siyum, wherever you are, is sponsored by Miriam Tannenbaum, Le'iloi Nishmat Jack Zemsky, her father, Yaakov Yitzchak ben Moshe Nachum Alevi, and Miriam Etzer's Zichrono Lebracha. His 18th year at site was yesterday, the 8th of Adar. Our father's life, like Moed Katan, encompassed both the twining and the dialectic between Simcha and Avelut. In dealing with life's challenges, he both confronted them and chose to live a life of Simcha. His service of Hashem was heavily influenced by those experiences and the teachings and Simcha of Hasidut. Upon his passing in Chodesh Adar, only days before Purim that year, we felt it timely, as though he would have wanted the sadness to be somewhat muted at this joyous time of year. Yehi Zechro Baruch. And the Siyum Moed Katan is also sponsored by Sara Berelowitz, who we're going to hear from later tonight, in memory of her mother-in-law, Sarah Taiba Bat David Shlomo Zichrona Levracha. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. We have a very short daf. So here goes. We finished a little bit early yesterday, so we're going to start at Kaf Chet Amud Bet, about 7 lines from the bottom, Amal Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so we're going to start now with different laws. We've been talking about Avelut for a while. So Rabbi Yochanan says, this is a very famous halacha, very well known, although not necessarily to everybody. It's always a little bit tricky when you get into a shiva house. There's all sorts of rules you need to know. So one of them is you're actually not supposed to greet the Avel. You're supposed to wait till they start speaking to you. Shnei amal. How do we know this? We learn it from Eov. He's our best example, or one of our examples. We've seen a number of examples throughout the Tanakh of different people who were in Avelut. So what Eov, it says, Acharechem patach Eov et piu. It says Eov spoke. V'hadar, and actually this is the next chapter, it says, Vayan Eliphaz HaTemani. Only after did Eliphaz HaTemani start to answer him. So you see that Eov spoke first, then his friend spoke. That's what we learn. Amar Rabbi Abahu, minayin la'avel shemesev berosh. Another very interesting halacha. An avel is supposed to sit at the head of a table. If you remember, we learned not so long ago that an avel is not supposed to stand up for nasi. He doesn't need to stand up. And we said possibly because there's some sort of hidor involved in standing up, some sort of glory. And an avel isn't part of that whole thing of glory. Here's very interesting, because here we're all of a sudden giving respect to the avel, and he gets seated at the head. We're going to see some interesting comparisons. So first, we're going to see where we get this from. Shne'emal evchar darkam ve'eshev rosh ve'eshkon kemelech bigdu ka'asher avelim yinachem. So again, we have Eov speaking, and Eov says, I wish, this is Eov, remember what happens to Eov. He loses his family, right? A terrible tragedy, and he sits there mourning with his friends. And then at a later point in the book, he says, listen, I wish I could go back to where I was back then, before, when I was a very prominent person, and I would sit like the king in a gedud, like the king in charge of his troop, and ka'asher avelim yinachem, and like the avel, who there's a little bit of a tricky part about the wording here, yinachem, like an avel will, it's exactly a little bit unclear. We'll see in a minute. The Gemara is going to say, ka'asher avelim yinachem, it sounds like the people who give comfort to the mourners, even though it's really talking about the mourner. But we'll see in a minute. So basically we have here is all of a sudden a mourner and a king are in the same category, which in and of itself is an interesting thing. We'll come back to it in a moment. So the Gemara says, Yinachem, wait, the grammar here doesn't sound right. Yinachem sounds like, as I said, sounds like the people who are coming to comfort. They're the ones who sit at the head. Achrine mashma, it sounds like the others. So I'm Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Yinachem ktiv. You should play with the punctuation, with the vowels. It shouldn't say Yinachem. It should say Yinachem, which means will be comforted, like the mourner when he is comforted or she is comforted. So we basically have a pasuk that describes, that was just a small aside to kind of fix the verse to mean what it really means, which is it's talking about the mourner. Marzutra Amar Mehacha, he brings a different verse, Besar Mirzach Sruchim, which means Mirzach Naaseh Sar Lisruchim. The way they understand this verse of mirzach, which is mal and zach, it means someone who's bitter, someone who is a mourner, will sit, he will become the head of the others. Okay, so we have this idea of a mourner sitting at the head, getting a lot of respect. Now we're going to talk about some other people that also sit at the head. Amar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, Minayim lechatán shemeseh barash. How do we know that a groom sits at the head and gets all the respect? Shenemar kechatan yechahen pe'el. The chatan will, now yechahen comes from the language of kohen, but it really means will serve or will be served or will, trying to think of the exact translation, but kechatan yechahen pe'er, he will bring glory about. So, or he will have glory about him. So now, but they take the Katan and the Kohen and they say, oh, wait, Ma Kohen Barash, we're going to compare a Kohen and a Katan. Ma Kohen Barash, Af Katan Barash, right? You're familiar at this point with Drashot. They take things out of context. They say the word, oh, the root Kohen, the root, the Katan, let's put them together. Just like a Kohen is always at the head, also the Katan, the groom. So now they say, well, how do we know about a Kohen? Kohen, Gufe Minalan. It says about the Kohen, you will be sanctified. We should sanctify him. What does that mean? Liftoch Rishon, Livarech Rishon. He gets the first aliyah. He does the zimun, right? He's the one who makes the bracha first. And he also gets the best portion. That I've never seen as much, but it's the first portion that you give him the food first. Okay, so there you have this comparison. We have an Avel, we have a Chatan. This is very interesting because we know, and I've mentioned this a number of times throughout this Masechet, when we get to Masechet Ketubot, we're nearing that. We're getting closer. We still have a little while because we have to get through Chagiga and Yevamot first. But when we get to Ketubot, the beginning of Ketubot, they make a lot of comparisons. We've been mentioning this Birkat Avelim, which seems to have this parallel. It's a parallel to the Birchat Chatanim, to the Sheva Brachot. And there's a lot of comparisons between Avelut and a Chatan. I wanted to just talk about a few things. I was thinking, if you take these two concepts, you have two people that are in a very strong emotional state, right? If you think about the most emotional days of your life, it's when you're getting married, one of them, and when you're mourning. Okay, there's a few others also, I'm sure, along the way, children, grandchildren, all sorts of things, but sure there's, graduating from something, all sorts of events in life, but these are of the two that are pretty high up on the list. So number one, they're a time of extreme emotion. Number two, they're moments that we usually share with the community, okay? Corona aside, okay? But there are times when we usually have a big crowd of people. A lot of people come to funerals. A lot of people come to weddings. And what's interesting, and this is, I think, the point that they're really keying in on, which is the Chatan and the Avel, the mourner, they both become the center of attention, right? Sometimes people aren't always so happy with that. Right at my wedding, I definitely didn't want to sit in that chair and be the center of attention and everybody coming to say hello. Anyway, maybe one day I'll tell you the story about what happened there. But the idea here is that you're the center of attention at that moment, and everyone's kind of around you. And to a certain extent, what's interesting is that they're putting the mourner in a place of it's the center of attention out of respect. People are coming out of a sincere respect for the mourner. So it's very similar to the Chatan, and there's really a lot of similarities here. Obviously, it's, the opposite in terms of the emotions. And we'll get back to this when we end our Masechet and we kind of go back. We're going to think a little bit and compare this idea of the Chol Moed and the Avelut, which is really the core of our Masechet. Okay, continuing on. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Kashe Yitziat Neshama Min Haguf. Okay, you can't have this whole thing about mourning without talking about the struggle of death. We actually had those stories with the angel of death a few days ago. Now we're going to say that, and there we actually saw that those rabbis had a pretty easy death, but they say here, Kashe Yitziat Neshama Min Haguf, when the soul leaves the body, it's painful. Kitzipore b'fi haveshet. Okay, what is this? This is imagine trying to pull through a hole. You're trying to pull through, okay, this is like a hole on the boat where you put you put like the string in to anchor the boat in. So you're trying to put something through a hole and it's got a knot at the end of the rope. Now try to pull that through. It's impossible, right? That's what they say that feeling is of the soul leaving the body. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Kipture b'fi veshet. Okay, he says it's, okay, there's a bunch of different interpretations here. So I'll kind of, I'll go with one of the interpretations that instead of having a knot there, it's that you have a rope that's a little too thick for the hole. So imagine trying to pull that through. So it can get through, but it's very painful to get through. I wondered, by the way, if they're talking about the actual experience, I assume they're talking about the experience of the person, but it's also the experience of one watching or nearby, anyone who's experienced this, right? It's a difficult moment, right? So I think they're addressing a bunch of different elements about this. V'amar Levi bar Chayata, Hanif, interesting, his name, Chayata, okay, from life. Haniftar min hamet lo yomar lo lech l'shalom. We're now going to have a repeat of a sugya we had in brachot. Don't say go to peace, ela lech b'shalom. Go in peace. Okay, so when you're saying to someone this is after they've died, and you're kind of saying your parting words before they bury, so you should say go in peace. Haniftar min hachai lo yomar lo lech b'shalom, ela lech l'shalom. Go to peace. Okay, so there's a difference between the language you use for someone who's on their way, who died, and someone who you're blessing when you go in. I wanted to just connect this a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I wanted to just think about this idea about the blessings. We saw this a number of times in the Masechet. We saw the blessings of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who wanted his sons blessed, and then it was his son went to get a bracha, and it ended up sounding a little bit more like a curse, right? Until Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai kind of explained it in a way that it was more positive. Right? We had this idea of the blessing that when you say something, it's going to come true, right? That Shmuel and his brother-in-law, and then he caused the Avelut, he blamed him for the cause of the Avelut of Shmuel's, that he ended up sitting Shiva because of what he said, right? And this idea of blessings and maybe the opposite of blessings, being very careful about how you word your blessings. Now, where do we get all this from? Bishalom, Lishalom, what's their proof? So we're now going to see some sources from the Torah. Haniftar min hamet lo yomar lo lech l'shalom ela lech b'shalom shenema v'ata tavo al avotecha b'shalom. This is from Avraham. God tells him, you will go to your ancestors in peace when you die. Haniftar min hachai lo yomar lo lech b'shalom ela lech l'shalom. We're going to make a very interesting comparison, almost a little bit surprising, especially for the end of a Masechet. Sharei David amar la Avshalom lech b'shalom. King David told Avshalom, go bishalom. He was still alive. And what happened to him? Halach v'nitzla, and he ended up getting hung. Yitro, now we're comparing David HaMelech, who, right, we think of very high level. And then Yitro, who is not even Jewish, right, but also in our tradition, takes a very high place within our tradition. And I want to get back to this idea in a minute. Yitro, shamar l'Moshe, lech l'shalom halach v'tzliach. Right? When he says to Moshe, this is when Moshe leaves his house in the beginning of Sefer Shemot, and he says to him, go in peace, right? Go to peace. And then he goes, and obviously Moshe is very successful in his leaving from Yitro, in his parting. So you see here are our proofs. Okay. So again, interesting that we pick Yitro. I want to come back to that idea in one moment. The Amal Rabbi Levi, we now have the very end of our Masechet ends with two different drashot on one verse. The Amar Rabbi Levi, kol yotzei mi beit hakneset lebeit hamidrash, umibeit hamidrash lebeit hakneset. You go from the shul to the beis medrash, or you go from the beis medrash to the shul. Zocheh umekabel pnei shchina. You will be rewarded by seeing the presence of God. Sounds a little bit like the whole in Megillah. Remember, if you turn a shul into a beit medrash or a beit medrash into a shul, which one is more, right? And here it basically seems to say neither one is more significant. Right? Go from one to the other. That's the way you're going to get to see the Shekhinah. And the next line is Shenemar. Where do we get this from? From the verse, Yelchu michayil el chayil yera'eh el Elohim b'tzion. You should go from one strength to another. This is something people quote all the time. Go from chayil el chayil. Go from one strength to another. Go from the Beit Midrash to the shul. Go from the shul to the Beit Midrash. That's where you should be. And then you'll see Elohim b'tzion. That's how you will merit to see God in Sion, which, by the way, is a clear, in my mind anyway, is a clear reference to our next Masechet, which is Masechet Chagiga, which is going to start out, we'll get to it in very soon, the very first words, which is to go into the temple to see Pnei Hashem on the holiday. So there's a clear connection here, and we'll get back to that as well. Now we have one more drasha of that pasuk, and that's how we'll end our Masechet. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi amar Rav, Talmidei Chachamim en lahem menucha afilu laolam haba. Talmidei Chachamim will never rest, even in the future world. There is no rest. Okay, so if you were looking forward to having rest, if you're Talmid Chacham, forget about it. Never any rest. But this isn't a bad thing. Shene'emar yelchu michayil el chayil yera'eh el Elohim b'tzion. And here, in this time, we're not talking about chayil el chayil. We're talking about from this world to the next world. And basically, the idea is that don't think there won't be Torah study there. You'll be busy studying Torah there as well. Some people will explain it'll be different. You'll understand everything as opposed to in this world, right? If you feel like you don't understand everything, don't worry. Clearly, they didn't think they understood everything either. So the commentaries, some of them say, things will be much more clear there. Okay, but there will be Torah study going on there. And therefore, if you're a Talmid Chacham, Torah scholar, there will always be learning to be had there. And with that, interesting, we end the Masechet. So I want to think about a few things. Number one, this is very typical for Masechet to end talking about the importance of learning Torah. Happens in a lot of Masechet. But the thing I really want to think about is this idea of Avelut and Chol HaMoed that we've been talking about. Our whole beginning of the Masechet was all about Chol HaMoed. The end of the Masechet was all about Avelut, mourning. And we've talked about some comparisons. I wanted to think about a few of the main differences between them and then connect this with some of the things we learned here at the end of our Masechet. So if we talk about Avelut, it's something that comes generally, it's unexpected, right? So it's something that kind of comes out of you. The holiday is very expected. You know when it's coming. That's very expected. It's planned. You can plan for it, right? One of the things about Avelut is super unplanned. You certainly weren't planning for it. Even people who are planning for it don't really fully plan for it. Second is obvious, right? Sadness, happiness. Okay, that's clear. Avelut is something that's happening to you on an individual level. A holiday is something that's happening on a communal level. And the fourth, and this I think connects with this idea of Yitro, which is that Avelut is a universal concept. Whereas a holiday, yes, there's holidays in all religions, but the holidays, specifically the holidays that we celebrate, are specifically Jewish in nature. And I think that that's also a big difference between Chol HaMoed, the holiday, and Avelut, is that Avelut is something we can all understand on a universal level, which is, I think, maybe why they're using the Yitro pasuk to show you that this is something anyone can teach us about because it's a universal idea. And it's not just something unique to the Jewish people. So now, one of the main themes is Avelut. Another difference is Avelut. It's very easy to experience the emotion of Avelut. Most of us who go through some sort of mourning experience, it's very, very real and very raw and very, right, it's there. Holiday, it's a little bit more tricky because it's something that comes upon, right now, on the one hand, it's planned and we can plan for it and get ready for it. And if we do it properly, then we get in the mood and we feel the emotion of being happy at the holiday. But it's not the same kind of feeling. First of all, it's communal, which means on the one hand, everyone's doing it, which is good. And it's one of the things that when I moved to Israel, you feel it much more in the air because everyone around you is celebrating, but even in other places, you're in communities where people are celebrating. So that helps you get in the mood. But when something happens to you as an individual, like think about the morning on Tisha B'Av and the morning when you're in Avel, right? The morning on Tisha B'Av is, okay, we're trying to mourn and we're sad, but it's not as real a feeling as when something individually touches you. And I think that one of the ways of maybe trying to get, and maybe the Masechet is hinting at an answer to that at the very end of the Masechet, which is almost, you can look at it as giving you a way to think about how to better experience the Moed. We started the whole Masechet with all these external things. Don't work, don't do this, right? All these things that if you don't work and you don't go to your job and you don't do all your regular things, so that's a good way to get into the mood. But it's all kind of negative, right? Don't do this, don't do that. If you prevent yourself from doing those things, maybe you'll get yourself to the place where you need to be. But I thought that this idea about Yotzei mi Beit HaKnesset, LeBeit HaMidrash, and Beit HaMidrash, LeBeit HaKnesset, I thought that maybe what they're getting at is this idea that if you spend your days, and I don't mean all day long, but if you spend time going to the Beit Knesset and to the Beit Midrash and you make it a focal point of your day, whether it's your personal learning, your personal prayer, and that becomes central to your life. Again, I don't mean necessarily spend all day, but you have those moments in your day when you do that. That, and this line is really a beautiful line. It says, Zocheh u'mekabel pnei Shechina. What does it mean? It means that if you surround yourself with these things, you will experience seeing the Shechina, because when that holiday comes along, because what's experiencing the Shechina? It's in the holiday season. That's when we do it. When those holidays come along, you'll feel it because you'll be involved. I'll give an example, right? Those who were learning Pesachim for the Daf Yomi before, and those who came to the skills class, and we learned it before the holiday. And then you came to that holiday, you were so prepared for it and so excited for it because you were living it, not just, right? Holidays happen at different points in the year, but they're really supposed to pervade our everyday. They're having these moments to be able to experience God in our everyday life. And I think that what this is getting at is the way to do that on a daily basis is your prayer in the shul and your learning in the Beit Midrash. And that there's something about that connecting. First of all, they're both not only places where you're doing good things like praying and learning, but you're doing it with other people. And I think, I look around at all the faces here and I see, right, the strength of the community and the learning with the community, how much that brings to people's lives. And may we be zochet through this to be able to feel that we have the Shekhinah with us. And I just wanted to point out one idea, because I was listening this afternoon to Dr. Ayelet Lipson's introduction to the Masechet, and I wanted to quote her because she says very beautifully that about this idea that once there's no longer a temple, there's no way to see God's presence, right? Because we can't go to the temple and see God's presence anymore. And she says the holiday is the replacement for that, right? The learning Torah is the replacement for that. She talks about even the multiplicity and the different opinions and learning through all of them. That's our way that we have of connecting to God. So with that, we will finish our Masechet and we'll learn a little bit of Chagiga, and then we'll get on with our program. Hadran alach elu megalchim uslika la Masechet Moed. Okay, I'm going to bring up the Siyum on our screen, and here it goes. Everybody ready? Hadran alach Masechet Moed Katan v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Moed Katan v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Moed Katan v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'al mahaden v'lo ba'al mada'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Moed Katan v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Moed Katan v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Moed Katan v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'al mahaden v'lo ba'al mada'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Moed Katan v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Moed Katan v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Moed Katan v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'al mahaden v'lo ba'al mada'ate. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu shetehei toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh utehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Adar bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei toratcha befinu ufipiyot amcha Beit Yisrael. ונהיה אנחנו, כולנו, צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. מאהבי תחכמני מצוותיך, כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך, למען לא אבוש, למען לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך, אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת מועד קטן, כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. ויתקיים בנו ותהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, והקיצות היא תשיחך. כי בי ירבו ימיך, ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, בשמאלה עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Asher kochech, to everybody finishing. Mazal tov to those who are not finishing. This is a good time to start. We have one more Masechet till we finish Moed. And with that, I'm going to open the mic to Maggie Sandler. Our behind the scenes everything.
Hi, everyone. I don't normally speak at this point in the Siyum, but we have been working on a few special projects in order for the upcoming Siyum of Seder Moed, which is a very exciting and historical moment because never have there ever been so many women completing all of Seder Moed together with the Daf Yomi. So we've been working on a few different projects, and I wanted to talk with you about two specific ones. One project, we are calling it the Seder Nashim Kit. We are working on 7 bookmarks, each for one Masechet of Seder Nashim, and you'll be able to order these free of charge. We're going to launch that on Monday, so look out for the order form. There will be 7 Masechet for 7 bookmarks. There's been a team of women who've been working on important and recurring terms and words that are going to help you along your way in Seder Nashim. Okay, and if you'd like to sponsor a bookmark, there's only 7 of them, so please let us know soon. You will basically select a Masechet of which the bookmark you will sponsor. Okay, the next one is called the Hadron Tapestry, and for that we need the women who have been learning to collaborate. I'm going to show you what our dream is. We would like to create a tapestry of all the women around the world who have been learning. Essentially, it's going to look like a large picture of pictures displaying all of the different wonderful women who have been taking part on this journey, whether they began learning previous cycle, this current cycle, or today, and you're starting Chagiga, that's okay. I will give you a link to this page. It'll explain to you exactly what it is. You'll be required to send us a picture, a video that's not completely required, but we really, really would love for you to share a video of either you sharing with us your favorite quote or one of your favorite quotes that you've learned and explaining why you love it so much. And if you don't want to do that, you could also film yourself instead, telling us the story of how you came upon the daf and how it's been so far, or maybe if it started in one way and it's turned out another way, we'd like to hear it. So that actually I will share today, and you have about until Siyum of Chagiga to apply for this, but I will keep sending you reminders. And on Monday, look out for, there's a few sample videos on this page as well for you to look. You can see them. I don't know if I should show them to you now. I think I'll leave you intrigued and we'll watch them on your own. Okay, so mazal tov to all of you completing the Masechet.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you for making all that happen. And in terms of just one thing to add, in terms of ordering the bookmarks, because we're going to ship them around to different places. So it's going to be a very short amount of time to order. So basically, it'll open on Monday, the registration, and then by the end of the week, you'll have to order whether you want one or not. So get on it quickly. Okay, I'm now excited to move to the next part of our program. We're excited to have Rabbanit Nechama Goldman Barash with us. She's one of the leading Jewish educators. She lives in Jerusalem. Lives not in Jerusalem, but teaches in Jerusalem. And she's been really an incredible force of positive change for women's learning. And she will share with us some words on a very interesting story in our Masechet. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's quite an honor and privilege to be here, and amazing to see so many women studying daf. What I want to bring before us is a story that already intrigued me in the class that I'm teaching at Pardes, an advanced Talmud class. We're learning Ketubot, and part of what I want to show as I teach the sugya I've chosen in Moed Katan is the intertwining of sugyot in the Gemara, the incredible overlap in the scope and breadth of texts that we see and the way in which they interact with each other. And then I want to move us a little bit towards halacha, because in addition to teaching Gemara, I teach halacha, and I'm always amazed when there's so much compassion as the text moves from theoretical or from a narrative into something that's applied. And so I'm going to share my screen, and in 15 minutes, we're going to go through this story and see some really incredible sources that I think will be a wonderful way to wrap up and celebrate the end of Masechet Moed Katan. So what we have here, what I'm going to be focusing on is actually the curious story of Yosef HaKohen. I said Rav Yosef, apologies, I was on my way to Poland and I didn't have a chance to check the text, but it's Yosef HaKohen. And we'll see it in a moment. It was on Daf 23 of Moed, so not Moed Katan, not that long ago. But I'm actually going to take us back even a little bit earlier. Meta ishto v'nasa isha acheret eino rashai likanes lebeito ledaber imo tanchumim. So we find out if a man's wife dies and he marries another woman, and the understanding is within 30 days of his first wife's death. Part of what we're going to be unpacking today is when is a man allowed to marry so quickly despite the mourning for his wife? When is he allowed to marry so quickly or remarry so quickly? But we're going to answer that in a moment. So you're not allowed to walk into his house where the second wife is now presiding to speak words of consolation to him, even though you really are supposed to continue consoling for Shloshim. Matza'o b'shuk, but if you find the man in the marketplace, Omer lo b'safa rafa uv'koved rosh. So in the marketplace, you can speak to him with gentle words and in a serious manner. And Rashi basically says, v'nosei isha b'toch shloshim yom, within the shloshim, kagon she'en lo banim. One of the examples, it's a bit of a spoiler, right? That if he doesn't have children, one allows a man to remarry very quickly to fulfill pru or vu. And why aren't you allowed to come into his house? L'nachamo, to comfort him, mishum chalishat dat disha achrona. Now, Rashi says, because it will cause distress to the new wife, to the latest wife. And part of what I want to show you in this text, and it really triggered a lot of interest in me, this question of sensitivity in remarriages and the tension between remembering the first wife as one goes into a marriage with another person. There's going to be so much sensitivity in Rashi and Tosfot in how they read the Gemara, that really, it just reminds me how humane, right? There were people reading these texts, and while sometimes they seem sterile or very far away, in the interpretation, we see the compassion and the humanity. Not always, right? I'm bringing a text that I found particularly moving. And I'll just say, I'm teaching Ketubot, the sugya that cross-references the Moed Katan sugya is a bride or groom whose mother or father, the mother of the bride or the father of the groom, die on the eve of the wedding. What a tragedy, right? And how do you handle that situation? And in that, on that daf, you have a cross-reference to this sugya and Moed Katan. So Tana Rabbanan, this is where we find Yosef HaKohen. Kol shloshim yom lenisuin meta ishto asur lisha acheret ad sheyavru alav shlosha regalim. So we find out, normally you cannot remarry during shloshim, regardless of the type of avilut. And if your wife dies, you should wait 3 regalim. 3 holidays should pass. We're going to find 3 possible suggestions why you wait that long. It's not necessarily a full year, but 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, have to pass. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Regel Rishon V'Sheni Asur Shlishi Mutar. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's too much. 2 regalim is enough. So I want to bring you the Tosafot, right? Again, a really insightful understanding of the complexity of this situation. Ad Sheyavru Shlosha Regalim, Ad Sheyesh Shlosha Regalim Below Simcha V'lo Yishkach Ahavat Ishto. So you should not have 3 regalim, because a man should have a period of mourning to remember the love of his wife, the love of his first wife. Inami, the Tosfot says that's not all. Kidei sheyisa sha'acheret v'lo yeh zachor min harishona shelo yeh bet deot b'mita. So now the Tosafot say, so that if he remarries too quickly, he may be remembering his first wife at a moment of intimacy with his second wife. That's very confusing and also not considerate, perhaps, or sensitive enough to the complexity of this situation and the sensitivity of the second wife. Va'od pen yiskarena avat ishto lekantra. He may remember the first wife in order lekanter, to complain about the second wife. In other words, the Tosafot say you need a period of mourning in order to create a transition, in order to create a space in which you can move into another relationship. And there's complexity here, except what does the Gemara remind us? Now we're back in the Gemara. V'im ein lo banim mutar lisa la'alter mishum bitul perio v'rvia. If he doesn't have children, then he's actually allowed to remarry immediately to fulfill pru or vu. Heinicha lo banim ktanim mutar lisa la'alter mimnei parnasatan. If he has small children, he can remarry immediately because of the small children. And I just want to say, until the mid to late 20th century, really, it was assumed men could not take care of small children. That if a wife died, the grandmother, the aunts, there are stories of men who tried to fight to keep their small children. The children were taken away by family members, right? it was considered absolutely unthinkable that a man could take care of small children. The children would be at risk. Man had to go to work. And so what we have here is for the sake of the children. Va'amar ma'aseh shemeta ishto shel Yosef HaKohen, the wife of Yosef HaKohen dies, and he says la'achota beveit hakvarot, he turns to her sister in the cemetery, lechi ufarnesi et bnei achotech, not the most romantic of marriage proposals, but essentially he's saying, go and take care of your sister's children. In other words, go back to the home where, I'm going to marry you because we can't be beyichud, obviously, without marriage. And that's his proposal. Now the Gemara now says, the editor says, well, obviously, lo ba'ala ela b'zman merubah. He doesn't have relations. This was not because of sexual desire or need. Don't think that. That would be unthinkable. But because of the children. And then the Gemara says, Ma'ilazman Meruba, Amarav Papa Lachar Shloshim Yom, until the end of Shloshim. That's how long they wait. Now, what ends up happening is there's a long Tosfot, which I'm going to summarize, right? The question of what is happening here, what's Man Meruba? But there's one line in the Tosfot that I found, I remember it from when I was at Matan, when I was very young, one of the first Masechet I learned, and really, when you say what sticks with you, the Tosafot basically say, what is unique about Yosef HaKohen and the sister-in-law? Basically, what they say is as follows, that Shani hatam lefi shehi terachem al bnei achota yoter me'acheret. The need, the turning to the sister-in-law at the cemetery is there's an understanding that the aunt of these orphan children will have more compassion over the orphans than any other woman. And that again speaks to the complexity of bringing another woman into the home to raise another woman's children. The idea that the aunt will have allegiance, will have loyalty, will have particular love for these children. And that makes her a worthy wife, a worthy second wife. I remember that. I wasn't even married. I remember that stuck with me, that insight, that in this particularly difficult situation, the stepmother being the aunt, which may make us a little uncomfortable, but has happened over the thousands of years. It appears in various responsa. There was a movie Rama Burstein made about it, Into the Void, that the young sister-in-law marries the brother-in-law after her sister dies tragically, leaving a baby, right? They play with that idea that there's a certain amount of compassion. And so as jarring as the story is, in the space around the story, we are invited to recognize the complexity, the need for compassion, and begin thinking what is best for the children, because they are left very vulnerable, in addition, of course, to the husband. And so what I want to end with in the last few moments I have is what happens in the Shulchan Aruch. What we really have, first of all, in order to make Yosef HaKohen a little more kosher, if you will, there's a Gaonic tradition that this is Erev Pesach. So Shiva ends as we go into the holiday of Passover. And so you don't have the discomfort. Wait, he really married her during Shiva, during the 7 days? That seems unseemly. So the Gaonic tradition, which gets passed on, is it was Erev Pesach. And so we get around a little bit the discomfort with someone getting married during Shiva. Okay, so that's just, again, a little bit of how interpretation works, how narratives are passed on. What we get to here in the Shulchan Aruch is the mourner is forbidden to take a wife during the entire 30 days. Okay, we know that. If his wife died, he is forbidden to take another wife until 3 festivals have gone by her death. The Mordechai says something very interesting. What about a woman? How long does she have to wait to remarry? Look what the Mordechai says. A woman does not have to wait until 3 festivals have gone by before remarriage, because it's more important for her to be married than to be single, and consequently she is more apt to forget her former husband after 30 days of mourning and devote herself to her new partner. I'm not loving the interpretation. It's based on the fact that the Gemara does not make a woman wait. She has to wait to make sure she's not pregnant, but she doesn't have to wait 3 regalim, and they come up with this idea, this paradigm, that women immerse themselves fully in marriage, whereas a man may be still thinking about his first wife. Again, these paradigms or these categories are perhaps not completely accurate, but they are trying to get at differences in relationship. Okay, let's keep going. If he has not complied with the duty of propagation, or if he has small children, or, and this is very interesting, if he has no one to attend to him, this gets added in the Rambam already. Small children, no children, and what about a man who can't take care of himself? And the Gemara already knows, the Midrash, a man will bring home wheat, but he can't cook the wheat. He'll bring home flax, but he can't make clothing out of flax. This idea that there are men that cannot care for themselves, grooming, hygiene, feeding themselves, and so on. I remember a New York Times article that came out many years ago showing that men alone who lose their spouses have a shorter lifespan than women who lose their spouses at a certain age. Why? Because men, they don't take care of themselves, neglect. I hope that statistic has changed, but we understand there's something real here. And what happens? He should not cohabit with her until after 30 days, unless, of course, he hasn't done pru or vu, and then he just has to wait till after Shiva. Now look at what the Ramah adds. The same principle applies to mourning. Okay, we're going to keep on. Some say that even one who is wealthy and can afford to hire men and women servants, yet if his daughter or daughter-in-law are not present with him at home, so that they are unable to attend him. And now look what the Ramah adds. Again, here's where I see sensitivity going back down to the little details. Cleansing of his head or other private matters, right? He doesn't want his male or female servants seeing certain uncomfortable aspects of his body. Now, why he'd want his daughter and daughter-in-law is another question, but they're not living at home. Better that way. For he feels embarrassed when others do this to him. The law is this man is allowed to remarry, even if he's wealthy, even if he's able to hire servants. There are certain things that are really only appropriate for a spouse, for a wife to take care of. So we understand the no children, pru or vu. We understand the small children. A father is thought incapable. He needs help, and maybe the children will be in danger. But now, from Maimonides on, we begin to look at a different kind of man. A man who doesn't have small children, has children, but he struggles to care for himself. And I would add to this the loneliness, right? And this need for a spouse to know some of the most private things about himself. He doesn't want a servant to know that. He doesn't want his daughter or daughter-in-law, in my opinion, to know that. I would add that to the Ramah. And it is for this reason the custom hath spread that many people adopt a lenient view and take wives within the period of 3 festivals. And the Ramah says, with all due respect to the Tanakama and the Gemara and Rabbi Yehuda says 2 festivals, the reality is people really are, in reality, practical reality, there are situations in which people need this leniency, and a conscientious person should bethink himself. Okay, a chassid should try Baal Nefesh, but who gets to decide what that means? A lot of room opened for personal decision-making, agency in this very sensitive area. And now, if I'm allowed 1 more minute, I'd like to say there's something intriguing at the end of the Ramah. This is the kind of thing that always has me going searching. What is the story? One who was seized by the governor, and the latter refuses to let him go from his detention until he takes a wife within 3 festivals after his wife's death. Some permit him to remarry on account of his suffering, and this seems to me to be the fundamental principle. Now, I have to say, the first time I saw this Ramah, I was preparing it for my class in Ketubot. I had no idea what this was talking about. What is the governor? What are you talking about? What is going on? So, of course, I had to do some sort of backward searching, and I discovered in Rav Meir of Rottenburg, again, 12th century, a bizarre scenario where a governor takes hold of a man, a Jewish man. We don't know the whole story. Is it because he wants this man to marry his sister-in-law, the Jewish woman in town who wants, I don't know, but he says to the man, marry this woman or I'm putting you in jail. The man's a widower. He's supposed to wait 3 regalim. He's not without children. He doesn't have small children. The Maharam does not allow it, which I find particularly painful because the Maharam spent 7 years in jail and he knows how complicated jail is. And he says, yeah, jail is really hard, but you can get through it. So the Maharam actually does not allow the man to remarry within 3 regalim. That's a moment where I struggle a little. Why is the Maharam being so stringent? But I can't ask. Okay, the Beit Yosef or Yosef Karo re-examines this scenario and says jail is real suffering. And if we allow a man without children, a man with small children to remarry, we should make an allowance here. He doesn't put it in the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah puts it in and brings the story of the governor, the bizarre story of the governor that appears in the Maharam. And he says, if a governor seizes you and says, get married, or I'm putting you in jail, there's room to permit this, right? And so that really, for me, closed the door, or, finalized a story that had started 300 years earlier. And I'm like, oh, it took a couple of 100 years. The Maharam is saying, look, I need to be careful about directly overriding a Gemara. But the Beit Yosef says, what about Tsar? What about suffering? Maybe his life is even in danger, right? The Maharam doesn't seem to think his life is in danger, and so on. And so what I really wanted to show you, again, first of all, the Moed, Katan, and Ketubot Sugyot are talking to each other. It's really quite wonderful. We have this story with Yosef HaKohen and his getting married right there in the graveyard, basically on the way home from the cemetery. The Gaonim say that's Erev Pesach, makes it a little more comfortable. And the Tosafot remind us the aunt is the best mother for these children. And, and there's a true rightness, a truth, a yosher in Yosef HaKohen turning to her and saying, we need to do this right now. And then, as I showed you through the halachic, the years of halachic interpretation, recognizing in addition the no children, the small children, and the man who is struggling to care for his basic needs that we're going to make an allowance for. And then I ended with this curious story, even more curious than Yosef HaKohen, the governor, and brought what I hope is a happy ending. So a little bit of Torah to celebrate the end of Moed Katan. You should all go forward. Lech l'shalom, right? There's a lot of a journey left in our learning, whatever learning you choose. And congratulations.
Thank you very much. That was great. It was great to take these sugyot that were so real, and you can feel them, right? Sometimes you learn things that are, like we talked about before, the universal. It has such a universal nature. It affects everybody, and those were great issues to raise. It was particularly, I'm sure a lot of you also like the connection to those in the skills class on Sunday. We were just talking about the Maharam. So it's always fun when you're about him being in captivity. We were talking about Pidyon Shvuyim. It's always nice when often happens. As soon as you start learning something, everything seems to connect. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to introduce Sara Berelowitz, who is part of our daily Zoom group. I've gotten to know her well. I feel like I know her well, even though we've met in person only once. She lives in Jerusalem, works for the OU and OU Israel, and we're very excited to have her share with us her thoughts on Moed Katan.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm very excited to be here for another Siyum. It's like another milestone on our journey through the Daf. As Michelle said, I'm Sara Berelowitz. I live in Yerushalayim, and I learn on the 7:10 in the morning, Israel time, Zoom live group with Rabbanit Michelle. I'm sure if I was saying this in a room and all the people that are on this Zoom today, the ones that were on the 7:10 Zoom would now be standing up and applauding and being very proud of themselves, because we have become quite a community. If you want to talk about a kehillah of learning, I think the 7:10 Zoom is a huge kehillah. We've become totally enmeshed in each other's lives, and we feel like we know each other even though we've hardly met. So I wanted to tell you how I started learning Gemara and how I got to Rabbanit Michelle. A little over 2 years ago, at the end of the previous cycle, and there were a lot of Siyums going on in Yerushalayim. My husband and I went together, not to the Siyum of Hadran, but to the Siyum of Mizrahi, which was in Binyanei Haoma. And before the Siyum, they had different rooms, and you could pick which lecture you were going to before the Siyum. And there was a panel of women talking about women's Torah learning. And one of the Rabbaniyot said, we can't turn back the clocks. Women's learning is here to stay. And women are learning all over the place. The question is what we do about it. And why did she have a problem? She said, when you bring a group of women into a room and you want to teach them Torah, what do? You give them a whole bunch of source sheets. And on those source sheets, they're bringing all kinds of Rabbanim, Rav Kook, Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Nachman, from the greatest of the Rabbanim. But everything that they're saying in those sources are based on the Gemara. And you're bringing these sources to women who have never learned Gemara. So that means that the women don't really understand what they're learning. I sat there with my mouth wide open, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, my whole life, I really learned Torah. I went to yeshiva elementary school and high school. I even learned a little Gemara when I was in elementary school. And I went to yeshiva high school. I was here at a gap year. I learned in TI when I was in college. I learned a lot of Torah, and I always loved a good shiur. And here, I heard that everything that I learned doesn't really make sense. I don't really understand it. And even though I was so inspired by the Siyum we went to afterwards, I had this little pit in the bottom of my stomach, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it. The next day, my husband said to me, you know, Sarah, maybe I should learn the daf, because my mother's first yortzeit is going to be in a little bit of time. And if I learn brachot, I'll have a siyum to do at the yortzeit. I looked at him and I said, you know, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to learn too. To which there was pure silence from my husband. And he probably thought to himself, okay, just let her be, she'll get over it. And he said, okay, we'll both learn the daf. And that's how we started learning the daf. We were each listening to a different podcast. My husband gave me a little Gemara that he found somewhere in the house. He was using a nice big one and I was using a little one, and everything was fine. And we got to the end and we both really learned the daf and did a siyum at a friend's house. And it was very exciting. All the men had learned the daf, and there was Sarah who also learned the daf. And I was just floored. I was like, I did it. I got to the end. I couldn't believe it. We did it. And at that juncture, I think my husband understood that this was getting serious. It wasn't like I was going to stop. And he didn't really know what to do with all that. Anyway, then Corona came. And my daughter-in-law, she grew up in Ranana, and she babysat for Rabbanit Michelle when she was young. She sent me a link and she wrote, Ima, try this. I think you're going to like it. And I got on the 710 Zoom. And it really wasn't easy. Learning every morning at the same time, not only did I have to listen to something, but every day at the same time, I had to be very consistent, and that time became precious time. And a few weeks into it, I stayed on the Zoom after, and I spoke to Michelle and I said, I just don't think I'm getting it. I don't understand anything. I can't remember anybody's names. I hardly remember anything I learned. And Rabbanit Michelle said to me, wait, let me see if somebody's still on here. And I don't remember who it was, but Rabbanit Michelle had me talk to another woman who really encouraged me. And she said, you'll see, you'll get it. Just stick with it. You'll get there. And soon you'll understand that what you learned here, you learned there, and there are connections, and it's all great, and it's all going to be good. So that's what we did. I stayed on, and things became a little bit more familiar. And I started to understand the rhythm of it. And also, I felt like I started to know these people that I was learning with. Here I was in the Beit Midrash of Rabbanit Michelle. And not only did I get to know the people that were on the Zoom in the morning, but then there was Abaye and Rabba and all the Tanaim and Amoraim. And I started to learn that one of them was rich and one of them was poor, and one of them had a lot of children and the other one didn't have any. And we started to understand who they were and why they were saying what they were saying. And it was really, really special. So now you're thinking, what does this all have to do with Moed Katan? Well, it really does, because I'm sort of grappling now, 2 years and a little bit into my learning, of how to keep all this learning so special like it was at the beginning. Because now that I'm a little bit more familiar, and I feel like I am understanding a little bit, how do I keep it so special so that it's not just my morning habit of the 7:10? How does that happen? And I think that the Tanaim and the Amoraim in our Masechet in Moed Katan had that same tension between the Chol and the Moed. They were trying to tell us that really, even though you can't do things on Chol Moed, it's really a Moed. It's really very, very special. But we don't want it to be like a habit. We don't want it to be like a Chol. So therefore, they had the tension between what you're really not allowed to do, but all the exceptions of what you can do. If it's Davar Aved, so you can do it. And if it's not such a Tircha Gedola, so you can. And even more fascinating than that was their sensitivity that if you really can't buy anything unless you're buying it for the Moed, unless the seller is not going to have money to buy food for his family, then of course on Chol Moed you could buy something, which teaches us that it's not just about us, but it's about them. And it's about all of us together. And that wonderful feeling of being a part of something that's so ancient, yet so alive today. And that we're all here together on the same page. Before I end, I want to say something that I learned with Rabbanit Michelle in Masechet Yoma, in Daf Amud Bet, Ayin Bet, Amud Bet. And there's a beautiful piece there, and I think it brings this all together for me. And it says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha Zerim Hayu. Zerim are crowns. There were 3 different crowns. Shel Mizbeach, Shel Aron, and Shel Shulchan. The Mizbeach was talking about all the things that the Kohanim did in the Beit Mikdash. So who got that one? Zaha Aaron, of course, Aaron HaKohen. He took that, Binatlo, he took it. Shel HaShulchan, who took the table? Zaha David HaMelech, his dynasty, his family, Binatlo, and he took it. Shel Aaron, who took the Torah? Who took the Torah? The Gemara says, Adayin Munachu. It's sitting there right for you. Kol harotzeh likach yavo v'yikach. Whoever wants to take it can come and take it. And I think that's what Rabbanit Michelle is doing for all the women here. She's bringing it closer to us. She's making it a part of our life. She's making it something that we can take into the rest of our day, remember it, chazer it over, discuss it in our groups, in our WhatsApp groups, at work, and bring it all together. And I just want to thank you, Rabbanit Michelle, and the tension that I have in my learning to keep it so special as I get more familiar. That's what I'm going to work on. And I just want to have a bracha for everybody here. I'm really very excited. May each Siyum have the excitement of the first Siyum. May it be that special like the Moed. May each daf have the specialness and the awe of the daf before it. And my mother-in-law, who I mentioned before, her yortzeit is tomorrow night. It'll be 3 years. And this Siyum was in memory of my new friend, Miriam Tenenbaum's father, and my mother-in-law, Le'ilui Nishmat, Sara Toiba Bat David Shlomo. Mazel Tov to all the Misaimim and Misaimot of Masechet Moed Katan. Thank you.
Thank you. That was incredibly beautiful, Sarah. Really very, very touching. And while you were speaking, another student, Phyllis, always reminds me, because I always forget, I get caught up in the Siyum and the Hadran. And I said I was going to start Masechet Chagiga. And on the note of what you were saying, Sarah, I think this is a perfect beginning of Masechet Chagiga. Hakol chayavim b're'iyah. Now, I'm not going to continue and tell you all the people who are exempt, which is going to be the next few lines, which is, starts off, everybody is obligated in re'iyah. Everyone is required to see the Shekhinah. Everyone, and this is, if you could end our Siyum with the most beautiful idea of maybe it was Bashert that I forgot, and ending the Siyum with this idea about the fact that everyone's part of this world and everyone's part of trying to connect with God. And even though we're going to see there's a bunch of exemptions, which I should tell you already, including women. However, there is a Yerushalmi. It's quoted in the Koran. For those of you who use the Koran, there's a great footnote, and it says, my job hopefully I'll have time tonight to look it up before tomorrow morning to find it actually there. But he says there that there's a mitzvah, that the mitzvah of Re'iyah, we're going to see tomorrow in the Shiur. It's a debate. Does it mean the sacrifice that you're supposed to do when you come for the holiday, or is it just coming for the holiday? And the Yerushalmi, they quote that basically this is referring, all the exemptions are for the sacrifice, but actually women are part of this and children are part of it, and everybody is part of the obligation to go see the Shekhinah. So if we connect with the earlier idea of the Torah and that the Torah is our replacement for that. So we come full circle and pull it all together. So Mazal Tov to everybody. And thank you for all of you for being part of this. And as you all see, everybody brings their part to the table. And thank you to everybody. Mazal Tov.
Mazal Tov.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That was absolutely beautiful, and I just want to thank the whole Hadran team.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Yasher koach.
Thank you. Yasher koach, everyone.
Mazel tov, everybody. See you in less than a month.
Yeah, 26
Less than a month.
days.
Get your videos in, order your bookmarks.
No
Nashim is around the corner. Nashim, women.
Glowing. She's glowing.
Yasher koach, Todah.
Amazing.
I love my Hadran family.
Wonderful.
All mutual.
It's really, really beautiful. Thank you so much.
So do you have any loans on your home?
If there's somebody who's on a business call that might want to mute,
So you have a mortgage.
Yeah.
it's Torah everywhere.
Okay.
Shall we answer those questions?
And we're going to end the meeting. Hi, everyone. Mazal tov.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
See you soon.
And anyone on Long Island, join us tonight.